Some of you will know that in the Gospel of Matthew, the Beatitudes are part of the Sermon on the Mount, and they are consistently uplifting and reassuring. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Matthew's Beatitudes are followed by images of salt and light, more words of inspiration and encouragement. Meanwhile, today's reading is not from Matthew, but from Luke. So close and yet so far. In Luke's gospel, this sermon by Jesus happens on a plain, on a topographical low spot, so to speak, and it has a distinctly less exalted tone. It's not good enough to be poor in spirit or to hunger for righteousness. You have to actually be poor and genuinely hungry if you want to be blessed. And then the blessings are followed by what sounds like pretty bad news to the majority of us sitting here in the pews today. Woe unto you if you have enough to eat and if you have a little money in the bank. Woe if you are laughing now and if people think well of you. In our culture, obsessed as it is with celebrity, wealth, good food, and how many likes we can get on our latest Facebook post, it kind of sounds like Jesus is telling us we're all going to hell in a handbasket. Given a choice, I think most of us prefer Matthew's version of the Beatitudes, and we'd rather leave out the woes altogether. I tend to get spiritual whiplash when I listen to the Sermon on the Plain. As we go down the list of who is blessed, I can just about empathize enough to think that, in fact, I probably should be included among them, which is a big relief. But then come the list of the woes, and I inwardly groan because I recognize myself in them also. So which is it? Am I on the naughty list or the nice list? Am I in or am I out? Let's think about that reaction for a minute. First of all, it seems doubtful that a sermon by Jesus is really supposed to work exactly like a Myers-Briggs personality test or an online quiz to determine which Hogwarts house you belong in. It always seems to me that Jesus was more about breaking down binaries rather than reinforcing them. He liked to get people to think outside the box, not to force themselves into a smaller one. Jesus himself is both fully human and fully divine. He is both the Son of God and the son of a Jewish carpenter and a teenage mother. So why would Jesus be putting other people in boxes when it is so contrary to his nature to be easily categorized? Maybe the point of his sermon is not really about trying to figure out which category we belong in or someone else belongs in. Maybe one key to interpreting the Beatitudes and the woes is to recognize how interconnected and complicated our lives are and how much we all have in common. Think about them this way. I'm not hungry right now, but maybe I have been hungry in the past. Or I'm not impoverished at the moment, but maybe I know that I am only 1 or 2 lost paychecks away from losing my home or my health insurance. And even if you're not totally sure you can relate to those examples, then certainly all of us have known both joy and laughter, sorrow and tears. These are universal emotional states, not categories one inhabits for a lifetime. Another key to this passage is definitely to be found in the last line of today's reading. Do to others as you would have them do to you. This is often called the golden rule, and it's actually not unique to Christianity. A lot of religions have similar ethical codes, which makes me think that we all have to be reminded of it, because it's not the thing that comes naturally to most people. If I personally were living purely on instinct, I'd still be stealing all the good candy from my brother's Halloween bag while he was at swim practice. Instead, I had to be taught that it was really important to put myself in my brother's shoes. I had to learn to empathize with the poor guy who spent so much time in the pool that he came home exhausted and reeking of chlorine, and that he wouldn't want to find nothing but black licorice left in his stash. I had to learn that if I didn't want someone stealing my candy, I shouldn't steal someone else's candy, and that it had nothing to do with whether or not I would get caught or get into trouble. Instead, it had to do with empathy, with realizing that his feelings and my feelings were really pretty much the same about most things, and that if something was going to make me feel rotten, there was a pretty good chance it would make him feel rotten too. With the golden rule in mind, the list of woes and beatitudes become much less about making sure that I end up in the right category, much less about being certain that I'm okay and I'm going to get blessed, and much more about looking out for others, and especially looking out for those who clearly aren't okay, who aren't getting what they need. The Lutheran pastor Nadia Bowles-Weber talks about this in her recent book, which is called appropriately Accidental Saints. She writes, "When Jesus again and again says things like, 'The last shall be first, and the first shall be last, and the poor are blessed, and the rich are cursed, and that prostitutes make great dinner guests,' it makes me wonder if our need for pure black and white categories is not true religion, but maybe actually a sin. Knowing what category to place hemlock in might help us know whether it's safe to drink, but knowing what category to place ourselves and others in does not help us know God. And anyway, it's been my experience that what makes us the saints of God is not our ability to be saintly, but rather God's ability to work through sinners. The title saint is always conferred. It is never earned." Which of course brings us to All Saints Sunday and why we are having this celebration today. I'm afraid we are going to have to stop reading the Beatitudes as if they are going to tell us whether or not we are good enough to be counted among the elect, whether or not we are saintly enough to be blessed. Because obviously, we're not. Luckily, however, most of the people we call saints really weren't so perfect either. We are all sinners, and we are all called to holiness of life. There's just no either or about this. Whenever the world tries to make categories more important than people, you can be pretty sure that we're headed down the wrong path. It's true that even Jesus can be categorized. You can talk about how he was Jewish, he was a manual laborer, he was a resident of first century Palestine, but none of those categories will ever adequately sum up who he was. The same is true for all of us. Over this endless election cycle, we seem to be more and more desperate to lump people into categories, to figure out if we can be friends or even stand to be in the same room with people based on what box we think they fit in or what box they will check off at election time. This is wrong. It is sinful. It is unchristian. We do not need to be afraid of each other. We do not need to be afraid of Democrats or Republicans, NRA members or Million Mom marchers, Mexicans or Syrians, let alone people who profess a different religion than ours. People are more than the label we slap on them. And when we're trying to figure out whether they're okay or not, safe or not, blessed or not, our labels are always inadequate. Those decisions aren't up to us. They are up to God. We need to treat all people as we would like to be treated, all people, without exception. Because in the final analysis, categories don't matter, but people do. We're all created in the image of God, and God can work in and through each one of us more powerfully than we can ask or imagine. I understand how hard it can be to see God's image in another person. I understand even more how hard it can be to see God's image in ourselves, especially when we look in the mirror first thing in the morning while our defenses are down and before we put our game face on for the world. We might think that we just don't have what it takes to be saints, to fit into that glorious pantheon that crosses time and space and includes such a great cloud of witnesses. We might not understand how we could even begin to compare with St. Paul or Mother Teresa, St. Francis or Gandhi. But Jesus actually left us pretty clear instructions. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Turn the other cheek. Give generously. And do not be afraid. Jesus has been through all this before. Jesus has our back, and Jesus holds our future firmly in hand. What better reason to celebrate all the saints, all of them, could there be? Amen.